very close to an energetic gate which carries an astonishing energy of love and truth, which will no longer be denied on this planet.
Welcome back to True Reality TV Inside Love is One. This is episode 2. And in episode 1, I covered the story of creation as it was shared with us, right? By Mom and from the records that she accessed. So, me and Faith were talking about this because I said in that episode, that there's a paradox of like, was this an anomaly that occurred within creation, right? Creation is an experiment. Was it an anomaly? Was it part of the plan, right? Because in essence, source is always perfect. And I think that both of those things can be true at once, but it was very obvious that this was an anomaly, but at the same time, as Mom would always tell us, all things work for the light. Like, no matter what happens or what goes on, all things work for the highest good, right? So it's like this paradox of both are true. Like, was it the divine design? Because I hear a lot of people talk about Earth, and today we're going to get into the actual story of Earth. And I hear a lot of people saying how Earth was created to be this school where you come to have these hard lessons and you come to have this experience of like pain and suffering, and that it's basically this intense school. And that's just not true, because Mom, source, would never create pain and suffering, right? She didn't create darkness. She didn't create the ego. She didn't create these things. Nonetheless, this is what happened, right? But I wanted to give you guys a little bit of insight from Faith to follow up on leading us into the story of Earth and what was going on in creation, right? Like during those 19 billion years, and why Mom and Father had to come up with this plan. So I wanted to share a little bit of Faith's insight on this because I think it really ties it all in.
So I'm just going to voice note you. So I'm right at the part where you're like, we don't know if it was part of the divine plan all along or if it was an anomaly. And I feel from like my conversations with Mom and how she's expressed it to me, I do feel that it was an anomaly. So creation was happily experiencing itself and expanding. And what Mom always shared was when Jehovah made the choice to separate, creation didn't even know that it had really happened. He just kind of, because his new reality, the split that he created, was outside the perception of creation. So he was able to be in that vacuum and creating the black holes and the siphons without creation being aware. So creation kept on just going, and Mom shared it wasn't until Maldek exploded, the beings who had physical third eyes, that they were like, what the fuck? And then their track of love expansion, our track of love expansion and creation kept going, whilst Jehovah's track of destruction and siphoning began, until the point that those two realities, like they were going, Mom's going up the scale, that was going down the scale, but it became a circle, and his taking hit the interface of her creation in a palpable way that the two realities began to bleed and merge, and now creation was being actively altered. So I feel, because creation is perfect, This was mom's way of being like, oh, there was a hole in my design. And then, I mean, this gets into string theory. This gets into really core, this is literally string theory and really, really core physics. Like metaphysics is all about the first principle and the physics of singularity and anomaly. For example, the polar bear. There were only brown and black bears. Then there was a genetic mutation. And a random white albino bear was born. But lo and behold, that bear survived more in the Arctic Circle because of its camouflage. So then, you know, it's kind of like looking at this singularity aspect and this anomaly aspect, which honestly is like a lot to get into. But I do feel it was an anomaly that in a way was mom showing herself there's a potential hole. Because of love in the unknown, at any point, love could say, what if? What if I go outside the frequency of love? And it was almost as though that entire timeline had, what will happen? Well, billions of years of chaos and destruction and bloodshed and all sorts will happen. So it was like, in order to get it right and tight and stitch up the true creation, mom had to play out that eventuality. So it's a little theoretical. I know it's like outside the parameters of maybe what we necessarily want to focus on, but...
Okay. So I felt like that would kind of tie it all in just as a deeper understanding, right, of the fact that this anomaly did occur. And like Faith said, it's the what if. What if beings in creation were to go outside of love in the unknown? What would occur? How basically far away from source can you go? And can you bring it back to love, right? Can you bring everything back into the frequency of love? And that's essentially what the plan was that mom and father came up with, which was, like Faith said, this was outside of the scope of what creation knew. Like, you imagine that all of creation's existing in love and light, pure consciousness, unity. They didn't know what was going on. And so there had to be then this another experiment of, can we bring the anomaly? Can we heal the anomaly? Or can we, correct it to where we bring it all back to love? And so what mom has shared with us is, again, we're going to go into the story specifically of Earth here, is if everything could be brought back into love and reconnect everything back to source, essentially, that would be what we would call the second Big Bang, right? Because we had, what they describe as the Big Bang was the beginning of creation. It was the spark of prime source creating herself, creating a love mirror, creating fractals of source, right? So that was the first Big Bang. And as mom has said, that's why Earth is such an important planet, because this is the final battleground. Before she ascended, she said, all other planets have already ascended. All other lower realms have been cleared. Okay? All other lower entities that were basically kind of formed from the anomaly, right? So we're talking about the dark lower entities. They had all either been recycled already, meaning their energy was recycled and put back into creation as love, or they worked their way back into the light. So this was the final planet. So when Earth ascends, all of creation will ascend as well into an entirely new experience of creation, right? Because the first part of creation was just all love and light. It was just pure source energy. And then we see the fall from grace. We see the anomaly happen. And in the first time in creation, they had to witness and understand what darkness was, the absence of light, the absence of source, the absence of love. And now, when everything gets merged back into light, well, that's an entirely new story, right? And so creation is very much all present, watching Earth, okay? The entire cosmos is here because this is the final piece of the entire ascension of creation to begin an entirely new spectrum of creation. This is bigger than us. It is not about us. Like, it is about humanity, but it's also not about humanity. I want to make that clear. It's about us in the sense that this is the first physical ascension that has ever been attempted. All other planets that went through the ascension process, they were not coming from the third dimension. Okay? This is the very first physical ascension that has ever been attempted. And this is the final residing place of darkness. So it's not about us. This is about creation. So I mentioned a little bit about why Earth was so special. As it was designed as a Garden of Eden. It was designed as a place where we could come into a physical type of experience and we could play with creation in a physical way, right? And Earth is also the heart of this multiverse. Now, what that means is that we have a lot of resources here, okay? Resources that the dark wanted to harvest, okay? As I said, they cannot self-sustain. The other reason that it was sought after is if you kind of imagine the cosmic highway, right? Where there's portals and there's wormholes and there's lots of modes of travel. Earth would kind of be one of those places that you can get on any highway from here because it's at the center. So it was very sought after for a lot of those reasons. The resources, the beauty of the planet, and also the ability to travel in and out of it. Okay, so now we have to talk about, okay, so what happened with Earth, right? So Earth was a fifth dimensional planet. Again, it was the Garden of Eden. Now, the story of Earth really is going to begin about 27,000 years ago. And for many of you, if you're familiar with the prophecies and you're familiar with astrology, you might have heard of the precession of equinoxes. And the precession of equinoxes was basically a way to gauge these certain ages that we would pass through, right? You've heard of the Bronze Age. You might have heard of the Iron Age, the Dark Age, the Golden Age. Okay, so approximately every 26,000 years or so, the Earth moves through what we call a precession of equinoxes, and it actually changes its position. Okay, and this denotes ages. So 27,000 years ago is when Earth literally and figuratively entered the Dark Ages. Now, in astrology, we refer to this as the Kali Yuga, the Dark Ages, because we were literally and physically in the darkest age of the planet, meaning there was hardly any light coming in. Light is consciousness. And we were also in the Dark Ages because that is when this planet was overtaken by the dark forces. So I'd also like to talk about the story of Atlantis and Lemuria, because that story is what kicks off the true history of this Earth. Yes, Earth is much older than that, but prior to that, she was in her fifth dimensional state. Okay, so we don't know a lot of what was going on before then. Mom did not dive too deeply into that, but ultimately this planet was a fifth dimensional state. It had been untouched up until that point. So then we come to 27,000 years ago with the story of Atlantis and Lemuria. And from Mom's stories, which I'm going to let you listen to her words as she describes them herself. But there was an experiment taking place here, okay, with the civilizations of Atlantis and Lemuria. We were not an overly populated planet. We did not have a lot of inhabitants at that time. Atlantis was a 4D civilization. Lemuria was a 5D civilization. And the experiment was basically to see if Atlantis could evolve, could go through its ascension process while having a 5D civilization also on the planet. Could they kind of ascend to the fifth dimensional state? This was an experiment that went very awry. So I'm going to play it in Mom's words, and then we're going to dive deeper into how this story unfolded.
All right. So Atlantis somehow stole some technology from Lemuria. And when they stole some technology from us, I'm not really exactly sure. There's different stories floating around there about this that I have, that I'm still trying to put the pieces together. You have to understand, everybody, this is 12 years worth of putting puzzle pieces together. Right. I'm making sure I had the whole truth, because that's very important for me.
And basically, just to give an idea, this is how we got into this subject, was how the division of the left and right brain took place, which became the way that those who thought they were in power took control of humanity.
Right.
Okay.
As far as my understanding goes, is what I want to share. Okay. And when I share things, it's because I got validations, I got synchronistic events. That's how I receive whole truth. I make sure it's all validated.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, the angels just...
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks, angels. Okay. The Atlantis stole some technology. They began misusing it. I'm not sure exactly how. There's different versions of it. They were like worshiping gold or things like that.
Okay, so I'm going to stop there just to fill in some gaps to this story, because this was recorded in 2016. But Mom later did receive additional information that she shared with us. So as she's talking about here, that this was an experiment, right? So I mentioned that. Now, the area of Atlantis, so it's hard we're going to get to the ego program mind today, guys. It's hard to conceptualize certain things. You have to feel it. You can't try to figure this out mentally. That Atlantis was a 4D civilization. What does that mean, right? So when we're talking about the dimensions, right? 3D, third dimension, is what we currently exist in. It's very dense. We are stuck in linear time, okay? We have a very limited perception of energy, okay? In fact, because we exist in the ego-programmed mind, which is a big part of the story, we can only perceive less than 5% of all energy in existence. You are limited to your 5 senses, okay? Those five senses give you less than 5% perception of all energy. Now, in the fourth dimensional realm, you have access to perceiving more energy, okay? The fourth dimensional realm used to also be known, AKA, as the astral realm. Now, a fun fact about that, we're jumping around, follow me, is that Mom dissolved the astral realm in 2009. So the dark entities can no longer hide in the astral realm, just as a side note. So the 4D realm is where we enter the realm of just pure energy. But it's not unconditional love yet. It's existing in this realm of understanding energy, understanding how the laws of the universe work, right? So Atlantis, to our knowledge, existed around the area of the Bermuda Triangle, you know, off the east coast of the United States. Now, how far that civilization went, how big it was, we're not totally sure, but you can supposedly see remnants of it on the ocean floor. Now, Lemuria was based on the other side. So Lemuria was existing where Hawaii is now, and also towards the Polynesian islands, okay? And now, as Mom discusses here, that they stole some technology. Now, I think she's going to talk more about this, but essentially, Mom was incarnated in Lemuria as Sophia Gaia, Queen Sophia Gaia. That is where the reference of Sophia comes from. She was the Queen of Lemuria, known as Sophia Gaia, and she was married to Horus. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard of the Eye of Horus, and it's going to connect a lot of dots. Horus is actually the one who gave Lemurian technology, which was fifth dimensional technology. When we're talking about 5D tech, we're talking about crystal technology, plasma technology, technology that works off of consciousness. It's not physical. However, 5D technology must be used in the heart. You must be in a fifth dimensional state to use the technology, okay? So she's going to tell that story now, but Horus is actually the one who gave the technology to the Atlanteans. Now, many of you might have remembrances of Atlantis and Lemuria. A lot of us were incarnated in either place. Some of us were actually stationed in Atlantis to basically ensure that nothing went awry, which it did. And many were stationed in Lemuria, who were assisting with building light cities, you know, building 5D cities. We were still expanding in our physical creation at that time. So let's get into the next part.
Elements that you don't energetically put your energy into like that, they were misusing it. It blew up. I mean, Atlantis is blown up. They were coming to me, and it was coming to Lemuria. Because they were in 4D and we were in 5D. They came to me quickly. I remember being up on this, there was just huge windows. And there was overlooking an ocean. I could remember seeing. Because I remember the poet and I there. One day I was like, oh, shit. Fuck. What? The poet.
The poet.
We know who that is.
Okay, the poet. Okay.
Who I was trying to bring the father of all creation into him at that time.
At that time. Gotcha.
Which Horus was jealous because he was the king, but I had to be with him because I had to prepare him for bringing father of all creation in. So they came to me. They said, "This is what's happened." Okay, they're after now the unified field energy.
Okay.
So I took the unified field energy and I ascended. So they could not get it. If they would have gotten a hold of that information or that technology, they would have blew up this whole multiverse. We were not going to let that happen.
Right. So you were saying that was the first ascension, truly.
Yeah.
That your experience.
Right.
Right.
Which is why I've gone first now. Again. But now I get to take everybody with me.
I got a big I am getting goosebumps on that one. Jeez, I'm getting lit up.
Okay. So what she's talking about there is, so what was going on in Atlantis, right? These were, again, these 4D beings who were going through their ascension process, essentially, right? They were evolving in consciousness. They were attempting to basically move into that ascended fifth dimensional state. Now, some of you have seen things about Atlantis, right? And they're showing these very ornate temples that they had. Okay, they had high priestesses and high priests of Atlantis who were trained by the high priestesses and the high priest of Lemuria, right? And so they were given the sacred knowledge, the sacred wisdom, and they were attempting to learn how to utilize this, right? They were experimenting with energy. Now, what happened was gold was one of the things that was the Achilles heel here, because gold is a very high frequency metal, right? That's why gold is so sought after on this planet by the dark. They want it. And so gold was a high conductor of source energy. And so they started building these ornate temples and these things with gold, and they were mining gold from the planet. They actually asked Lemuria for gold as well, which we did give them. But what happened is they started externalizing source. They weren't getting it, that it was sources within. You are connected to source. So what happened? They started worshiping gold. This is why we still to this day worship gold on this planet. This is where it comes from. It comes from Atlantis. They started worshiping gold, putting gold as this obsession. And they also started, from some recollection, is that they were hoarding information, right? They started to create some hierarchy in their society, right? So those with the knowledge and the wisdom, the high priestesses, the high priests, they started hoarding the information. This is where secret societies started developing. Instead of everything being open source, they started to create these hierarchies to source. And as Mom's mentioning, the story of the poet. So there was a poet in Lemuria who she had a relationship with, because she realized that she was going to try to anchor in the Father God energies through him in Lemuria. As I've mentioned, Father God had to go down into the dark. Okay. So she did not have the Father God essence anchored in to the planet. So she was going to anchor in that essence through another vessel so that she could establish the Mother, Father, Godhead, the full source energy on the planet, okay? As she went on to say, Horus was jealous of that. Was that part of why he betrayed her? Why he betrayed creation by giving Atlantis the technology? We don't know. But Atlantis misused the tech. They weren't using it in love. They weren't using it in the heart. And they blew up the planet. And, that's a huge trauma for this planet. And it would be akin to today's terms of like a nuclear bomb. They inverted the 5D tech. And so what Mom is just speaking about there is she received word or received the telepathic communication that whatever was going on, they were about to blow this whole thing up. And so she had to take the unified field energies, which is pure source energy, and she had to ascend quickly off this planet. Because as she said, if that unified field energy would have gone down with the ship, it would have pulled this whole multiverse down with the ship, down into a black hole. And so she had to ascend quickly and take the source energy with her. That was the first ascension ever done. Now, at that point, what happened was Earth was knocked down in frequency immediately from 5th dimension to 3rd. Here's where the story continues.
We got big whispers. Wow. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
okay, Rob. So, the surface of many beings,
So when it blew
I
up.
think 200,000 of Lemurians escaped
Okay.
and were able to make it through the inner Earth portal
Okay.
after I ascended.
Right.
Some were left on the surface of the planet. Of
Okay.
course, many perished.
Right.
Yeah. And it wasn't like we were big, though. There wasn't a big population. I don't think it was that.
Right.
But that was all of us on the planet at the time.
Okay.
There wasn't other things that I can remember.
Right.
Because we were doing an experiment of 4D and 5D on the planet.
Correct. Gotcha.
All right. So, the surface beings that were left, the Anunnaki caught wind. They could have been involved in it. It's a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, they landed on the planet when these beings were in a primitive state because they had just went through tragedy.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
And they were able to convince them that they were their gods.
Okay. So, what she's mentioning here is that as the explosion occurred, there was about 200,000 Lemurians who were able to escape, whether those were Lemurians who were stationed in Atlantis or that were in Lemuria. We don't know those specifics, but as Mom said, that was all that was on the planet. This was not a largely inhabited planet at that time because we were doing the experiment. So as she said, many Lemurians passed in the explosion, just as many Atlanteans did. But there were some that remained on the surface that did survive. But there was about 200,000 Lemurians who did escape the explosion. And they went into a portal into inner Earth and later founded the civilization known as Agartha. So the Agarthans actually were previously Lemurians, okay? Now, this is an interesting tale because Mom had shared that the story from the Bible about Noah's Ark and the Great Flood was the story of the 200,000 Lemurians. That it wasn't a boat, but that they actually went through this portal to inner Earth in Arkansas. And that became the story of Noah's Ark. So they escaped. They go on to later found Agartha. And obviously there was remaining Lemurians and probably some Atlanteans left on the surface. But as the planet was knocked down in frequency into the 3rd dimension pretty much immediately, imagine it's like you go into a coma and you wake up and you don't know what's going on. You can't remember anything. They immediately went into amnesia from the trauma and from the knockdown in dimensions. So they were now in a very primitive state where they do not remember their source connection. They don't remember who they are, and they're in complete amnesia. Now, the Anunnaki, like Mom said, could they have been involved in this? It's very possible. Now, the Anunnaki is a special sector of beings who actually were part of the light. So similar to Jehovah, they were part of the light. They also split from creation and became what we now know them to be as these lower entity beings. Now, the Anunnaki, whether they were involved with this or not, they get wind of what's going on, they immediately descend onto the earth and basically convince these primitives that they are their god. Now, this gets into interesting history, because if any of you have ever watched Ancient Aliens, you will see the hieroglyphics around the world that depict these beings coming down in spaceships and saucers, right? Many believe that they were depicting the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki came in, of course, on their ships. These primitive beings having total amnesia are like, oh, these people must be gods. They convinced the primitives that they were their gods. And this is how the takeover of Earth begins.
And as that occurred, they disconnected the right and left brain function to put them in a position of only the left brain, make them robots, make them so they can be controlled. On top of that, Dad and I, father of all creation, had placed the original blueprint of the planet Earth was love mirroring love. So the twin flames could come to the planet and have this experience that we actually had put into place in Venus.
Gotcha.
We had spent an entire eternity in this experiment, trying to bring love into physical manifest. Intense times.
Yeah. It's making sense.
So we placed the dream machine here, and these beings decided to put a glitch in the dream machine. And they began pouring lower thought forms into the dream machine for humanity to play out for their benefit.
Right.
They were in power.
And that's how they got into power.
Right.
So ever since that moment until now, humanity has been in this deep state of unconsciousness simply because they've been only using the left side of the brain, except for those, you'll say, those of the light warriors who came here to raise many out of consciousness, including themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, go ahead. You want to say something?
Oh, yeah, just like went. It'll come back, baby, hopefully. What was I going to say? Oh, this is what I was going to say. So if there's a lot of people that probably remember a date called October 28th, 2011. There's lots of prophecies around this date. I got this documented years ago, but a lot of beings have stolen all my stuff.
Okay.
So I have everything on the starship. I just don't have it in physical form because they took it.
Well, you still have it.
Yeah, I still have it here in my heart.
Right. That's all.
Yeah.
So, it's October 28th.
So October 28th, 2011. We finished in 2009, I have it documented that we completed the new grid around the Earth.
Okay.
Then we had to put the dream machine into a reset.
That I did not. When did, what?
I feel that was the October, if I remember right, the October 28th, 2011, we were able to put the dream machine back into its original start anyway, because it's a process.
Okay.
If we would have, that's a lot of energy, so we had to do it gradually.
Okay.
So we started in 2011 at the end there. Okay. We went into 2012,
Okay, so what Mom's talking about here is, so after the Anunnaki take over, what they began what was called the Atlantean experiments. And so essentially what they did was they had to keep control of this planet if they wanted to stay in power of it. And they knew that it was probably only a matter of time before those surface level beings began to wake up, began to gain their memory back, in which case they would come back into their full power. And the dark would never be able to maintain the hold of the planet because they could just raise its vibration again. They could just ascend it back to its natural state. So in order to maintain control, they began the Atlantean experiments on the humans, what we now call human beings. And So as Mom said, the blueprint for Earth was love mirroring love. And this was something they had already done on Venus. And so the dream machine was a 5D technology that Mom and Father had created and had placed here on Earth as basically a portal. It was a portal that was constantly bringing in source energy to the planet, and that we were all connected to. The dream machine was like you could, because remember, the fifth dimensional state that the planet was in was still somewhat physical, right? Compared to the higher dimensional states. So we were still connected to that pure source consciousness, love in the unknown. And we could bring in those limitless ideas, those limitless possibilities, those creative genius thoughts, and we could bring them in and physically manifest them. Okay, so that was the dream machine, and it kept us all also in unity consciousness. So the Anunnaki took over the dream machine, and they implanted, as Mom said, glitches. So the first Atlantean experiment was that they severed the brain hemispheres. They severed the left and the right brain and moved us into solely left brain usage, because the right brain is the feminine brain. The right brain is what connects you to intuition. It's what connects you to the higher realms. It's what connects you to source. The right and left brain are meant to be whole and work together. The right brain brings in the source energy. It connects to the intuitive thought, the higher thought, and then the left brain deciphers it, right? Decodes it into language, into a thought, into an idea. That is the natural working of the brain, but they severed the hemispheres as part of their first experiment. That's why the left brain is known as the reptilian brain. That's where the fight or flight mechanism was implanted. That's where survival was implanted. That's where fear was implanted, and we have been completely cut off from the right brain. So when you see science talking about how we don't have access to more than 30% of our brain, that's why. So that was the first experiment. And then they started implanting glitches into the dream machine. They started implanting fearful thoughts, as Mom said, to have humanity play out for their benefit. Because remember, they lost their ability to create. So they have to have us create for them. So the first fearful thought ever implanted into the dream machine was that we were separate from God, that we were not a part of God. We were separate. And it went from there. They just started implanting any glitches, any fearful thoughts that they could to ensure that we would never remember where we came from, that we would never wake up, we would never regain our powers. This became known as the ego programmed mind virus that was implanted into the dream machine. Wayne Dyer famously coined what ego stood for: edging God out. And it is the virus that we are all currently suffering from to this day, unless you are actively doing ego death work. Now, they also began additional experimentations, genetic DNA experimentations, anything that would keep us in pain, suffering, fear, and low vibrations, so that we would keep creating a world in which they could exist in which they could siphon from, in which they could maintain power and control over. Now, as Mom mentioned, October 28th, 2011, Mom did in fact reset the dream machine. So it has been reset to its natural state. It is only that the virus keeps replaying in our mind that it still exists. It's like a hamster just continuing to run on the wheel. The virus is still in our minds, but the dream machine itself has been reset, meaning you can now connect back to source. So, and funny enough, just as such an interesting tie into my own journey, is mom resetting the dream machine in 2011. But I vividly remember, like such a vivid memory for me, when I started to wake up was in June of 2011. And I was researching something, I don't remember what, and somehow I stumbled upon this article, or it was an interview. I don't know how I found this. To this day, I could never find it again. And it was an interview with a doctor. And in this interview, this doctor said that he had all this information about the Atlantean experiments and about what they had done to humanity. And I guess this interview was done like 20 years before that, but he would not allow the interview to be shared until that time because he said humanity wasn't ready for it. And he also said he had more information that he didn't know when it would be ready to be shared. But he went in depth about the experiments that were done by the Atlanteans and the Anunnaki on human beings to disconnect us. And when I read this interview, my whole body was just like shaking because I knew. It woke something up in me, a memory. And I knew it. I was like, that's exactly what happened. I remember. It's exactly what happened. And from there, I started to remember. I started to remember what happened, why we were here, what was going on. And that is why mom spent 14 years talking about the ego-programmed mind. And that wasn't mentioned in the doc. And I think that was one of the things that I irritated me the most, I guess. Full transparency. I'm happy with full transparency and to be authentic and honest about all of the experiences we went through. But mom spent 14 years researching and diving into and talking about the ego-programmed mind, and that was never mentioned once. And it would not be a justice to her if we did not address that, right? Because that is the virus on the planet. Mom identified the ego-programmed mind as it was the root of all pain and suffering and all fear. It is the root of why we have conflict. It is the root of why we have division. It is the root of why we have violence and war and corruption. It is the root of why we have judgment and shame and guilt and arrogance and pride. All of it is due to that virus. And it is our responsibility. Yes, we cannot change what was done, but it is our responsibility now to take accountability for everything that has occurred on this planet and to say, we're taking our power back now. Dissolve the ego program mind, reconnect to source, because this planet is going to ascend. And I will end off with mom's story of what happened to her in 2012, which, of course, as you guys remember, crazy year, all this stuff was going on. Everybody thought the end of the world was going to occur. As I mentioned, the Mayan prophecy, the reason the Mayan calendar ended was because they understood that we would be entering the age of Aquarius. We were exiting the Kali Yuga, the dark ages, and we were entering the golden age of Aquarius, which means we are now receiving exponential amounts of light, which is consciousness, and we would enter the golden age. It's an age of enlightenment, the age of ascension, and linear time would cease to exist. That's why the calendar ended. And in 2012, mom fully entered the fifth dimension and she saw the planet ascend. So I just want to end off with that story.
12, everyone had this about the 2012, I was like at the center of it going, hello, this is what's happening. Everyone's like, ah! I'm like, whoa, do you hear me? It is not all of these things you're saying. So December 21st, 2012, all of a sudden I started seeing this gold energy was like pouring into me. I was like, whoa, whoa, tense. And that's when I fully entered the 5D frequencies. But then I was quarantined because the rest of the consciousness of humanity was not ready for that.
The unconsciousness.
Yeah, unconsciousness.
Right.
Yeah, check children.
Okay.
So yes, 2012, mom entered the fifth dimensional state, and from then on, she was bringing the consciousness up with her. But that's why the original, and we'll go deeper into this in terms of mom's mission stories, but that's why 2012 was the original intended date for humanity to begin the ascension process. But as she said, they weren't ready. And so that is why we are on a little bit of an accelerated trajectory now, because we need to speed up the process, because Earth herself is ascending with or without us. Okay, to make that very clear, with or without us. So now that is the story of Earth. That's how we arrived here. That is what's going on. And from there, of course, after the planet was knocked down in consciousness, mom said that the planet actually then was on a trajectory of heading into a black hole. And she had to use basically all the force of creation to grab this planet and place it back into its original place and off the trajectory of the black hole. And then, of course, there was a new plan hatched, which was how to regain Earth and how to regain its fifth dimensional state. And this has now been a 27,000-year plan that is coming to fruition. And this is where the story continues. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.
We are very close to an energetic gate which carries an astonishing energy of love and truth, which will no longer be denied on this earth.